We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
It's all hubbub in the legal and constitutional world this week. From mask mandates to compelled speech cases, we've seen it all. But to dig into the depths of how this impacts you and your liberty, we're joined by constitutional attorney and host of the excellent Uprising podcast, also Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Mr. Scott D. Casenza, Esquire. All those roles rolled into one. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Mark. Pleasure to be here. He, him.
Him. Are you clearing your throat? I'm not sure here. Okay, so let's start with the issue that I know everybody wants to discuss, and it's the state of free speech in America. Now, we've seen a lot of debate about this and how it should be regulated with the news of Elon Musk and his plans to take over Twitter. But there was a recent case out of Shawnee University. Can you give us the broad strokes on that?
Mark, free speech in the United States rests in one place, and that is with the people. If they demand free speech, they'll get it. And if they are tolerant of censors or demand censorship themselves, then that's what they'll get. And I think that what we've seen now with the reaction to Elon Musk and Twitter does not give a charitable account for how most Americans feel about free speech, or at least many Americans. Maybe I don't want to go too far and too cynical, but it hasn't been encouraging. So in any case, Nick Merriweather is a professor at Shawnee State University in Ohio, and he sued that university in 2018 because they basically disciplined him for refusing to use one of his students' preferred pronouns. This student, whose preferred pronouns deviated from their observed biological sex, demanded that he call that Professor Merriweather call them by their preferred name, pronouns, and he said, "No, I'll call you by any name that you want, but I will not go ahead with your preferences with pronouns." Well, that student said right at the time that they were going to try to get him fired. They weren't successful in getting him fired, but they were successful in getting an investigation and disciplinary letter and some other negatives. Which is not permissible if, in fact, it was free speech. And that's what Professor Merriweather argued in his lawsuit. And he got a $400,000 check from the university, along with his legal fees paid when that case came back finally and recently.
Now, it's funny that this case has come up, and it seems so new, because isn't this exactly the issue that Professor Jordan B. Peterson first came to prominence for, where under the Canada's new law was that he would have to use the preferred pronouns of people, and he refused to succumb to what he called, and what I believe is the technical definition of it, coerced or forced speech.
Yeah, so compelled speech is how I usually phrase it, and that's my understanding of exactly what Peterson was on about. He the whole sort of spark that ignited his international fame is really that video where he says, it's not about whether I choose to say these things. It's just that I refuse to be compelled to say them. And so, yes, the difference, of course, is that Justin Peterson was a Canadian professor in a Canadian college. I'm not familiar with Canadian laws like I am with American laws. So that's about as deep as I can go with the legality of Peterson's situation.
So let's get back to the Shawnee University one here. With this ruling, with this win for the professor, does it set a precedent, or does it encourage direction for other institutions in terms of attempting to coerce faculty members to use preferred pronouns or any other type of speech, for that matter, against their beliefs?
Well, it doesn't really set a precedent, except that no. So I want to be careful about using that word legalistically. Okay, what it does do is it announces to all of the colleges and universities in America that they better be careful about how they treat their faculty members who deviate from whatever the administration's preferred course of conduct is here, because they may have to pay up significant money damages if they do so. We saw, I think it was last week, came down, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, that the Oberlin College lawsuit against them for basically manufacturing racial hatred towards this one family that owned a store in the college town. They had to pay or were ordered to pay, I think it was 32-ish millions dollars, depending on how it's counted. And the more these kinds of, we've just really seen the wave of these lawsuits come in now, to where these awards are being upheld, which is what happened in the case of Professor Merriweather and with Oberlin. So I think it's just like, okay, we have the initial instances that generate these cases, and then now we have the result. And when the results come in, and there are many results that are piling up, and by and large against universities, well, that's when the sort of board of trustee meetings come in, and they say, hey, maybe it'd be good to keep some of our money in our pocket and not violate these people's rights.
So we're seeing that in the academic world. What about in the private business world?
Well, in the private world, you can punish people for their speech. If you work at a company and you don't like the way somebody talks, you're free to fire them if you like. So,
well, yeah,
no problem.
The term "it's a private company, it can do what it wants" that used to be so popular before Elon Musk said that he was willing to buy Twitter,
right,
and has now reverted to almost crickets. That's not a term that's used very much anymore. So let's talk briefly.
It's so horrible how he wants to increase freedom of speech on Twitter. So,
well, let's delve into that a little bit. You see, we've had a lot of people in the media, apparent
it's shameful, Mark. It really
journalists
is
saying that we need more regulation of speech on the internet. We need more censorship on the internet, although they don't use the term censorship. What's your take?
My take is that that's a national scandal from every journalist, really every public personality whose work depends on the dissemination of ideas. It's scandalous for, but especially for journalists, that they should want more censorship. It just tells you how far down the rabbit hole we've gone with people not respecting freedom of speech and not understanding that their freedom of speech depends on your freedom of speech and my freedom of speech. And it's going to be it's one of those things where I don't want them to have to learn their lesson the hard way. That would be awful as well. It's so we have to do the best we can to convince these misguided souls that freedom depends not on censorship, but on freedom.
I think it would be an interesting experiment to see if schools across the nation were to be as keen to teach what the First Amendment is as they are to teach.
Right. Yes. This biological, whatever, differences between boys and girls that seem too advanced for grade level, that kind of thing. Is that where you were going?
That is exactly where I was going. It's funny how the priorities seem so mismatched.
Well, we have this doxing of the libs of TikTok account, and that seems to be right on point with what you're saying. I mean, this account does nothing but repost the fantastic and often scandalous public videos that often liberal teachers post about exposing their young school students to aspects of their gender identity and sexuality, which seemingly have no place in school, whether we're talking about a kind of conservative or heteronormative culture or some wildly progressive one. It's not the business of a second grader in any case.
Yeah, I think it's notable that libs of TikTok isn't passing comment or judgment on the videos. They're using publicly available videos that these teachers, these educators have put out onto the internet themselves. And I think the argument that we live in echo chambers, I think libs of TikTok, they were pretty much breaking down those walls of echo chambers and exposing people from one side of the political spectrum to people on the other side of the political spectrum. And shouldn't that be applauded?
Mark, I saw, well, yes, and I saw, I think it was a tweet from Sagar and Jetty from the Breaking Points program, and he, I thought, made a very good point, which was, the real story here is how this non-political actor person just created this massive account, which is one of the most important accounts for conservatism and liberals on Twitter and in the political discourse. Maybe has moved this whole Florida legislation about don't say gay and all this. That's, in large part credited to to that account from Sagar, like how that happened politically. That's a fascinating story, you know, and it is just that they can't even abide their own content, right? When the light's shown on it.
There's nothing more devastating than a mirror, Scott. Thanks ever so much for joining us.
Gee, thanks, Mark.
That's almost it for this week on Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I want to thank our guests, Lisa K. Donner, Jeff Charles, Dave Patterson, and Scott Cosenza. And of course, you, the faithful listeners, for taking the time to join us. You're always appreciated. My parting shot for this week. It seems that we have become distracted politically. Rather than focusing on the fundamentals of what makes a nation exceptional, we're caught up in the weeds of preferred pronouns, gender education, legacy media talking points, all distractions from what those who want to preserve a nation need to be looking at. How to strengthen the Constitution and apply its principles to the modern political sphere. As President Abraham Lincoln once said, "Don't interfere with anything in the Constitution. That must be maintained, for it is the only safeguard of our liberties." And there can be no more noble goal nor aspiration than preserving the very things that make us free. Perhaps the time has come to refocus on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as the guiding documents they were always meant to be. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for
I think
LibertyNation.com.
we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
The tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for
Guess what?
Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I
others.
can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.